Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Faith and Science in Catholic Schools, a production of iTest. iTest is the Institute for Theological Encounter with Science and Technology, bringing you this series in partnership with WCAT Radio. My name is Patrick Panozzo, a trustee of iTest and your host for today's edition. I'm joined here today by William Bander, a science teacher at a Catholic high school in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome, William.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great. I'm glad you could come on and share your insights and thoughts with us today. Let's begin with where you got interested in teaching, or how you found your way into the teaching profession. Do you have a story to tell, perhaps?
Yes, and I wouldn't be a true St. Louisan without first starting where I went to high school, of course.
Okay.
So I went to Chaminade for middle school and high school, and I really developed a love for biology while I was there. I had a really good biology instructor, and he was the one who kind of encouraged me to go into education, and many of my friends at school kind of echoed the same thing. But being a teenager, of course, I, rejected any, authority and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to become a scientist.
Okay.
So I decided to go down to Springfield, Missouri, right in the middle of the Bible Belt. That's in southern Missouri, if you're not aware. And I attended Missouri State University, where I earned a Bachelor's of Science in Biology. And while I was down there, I actually had two jobs. One job was a paid job. I got $9 an hour to basically look at dead bugs under a microscope. And then the other job I had was a free job. I didn't get paid for it. It was a free service, and it was a tutoring service for students taking Introduction to Biology. And I found myself basically spending more and more time with those students, trying to help them out, getting a lot more satisfaction from them when they were telling me, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to fail biology, but you helped me get by with a B. Thank you so much. This really made an impression on me, and I decided, maybe my biology teacher and all my friends were right. Maybe I should go into education.
They saw something there, yeah.
Yeah, so after I was done with, getting my bachelor's in biology at Missouri State, I decided to come back to St. Louis, where I attended Maryville University, and I earned a master's in secondary education. And my student teaching was mostly in the public school area, Parkway South High and Roosevelt High School. My first full-time teaching job was at Riverview Gardens High School, but shortly after that I came to Priory, and I've been teaching science here for, it must be 8 years now. I just finished up my 8th year.
8 years, okay. Okay, well, I'm anxious to get to that portion of your young career, I suppose. But let's rewind back a little to some of the earlier things. Just to be clear to anyone listening here, we've got Chaminade mentioned, so an all-boys school. Is that correct?
Yes, it's an all-boys school. When I was attending, it was 7 through 12, but they've since added a 6th grade. And now I'm teaching at a very similar school. St. Louis Priory is also an all-boy Catholic school, and we teach from 7th grade to 12th grade. So both very similar to each other. Well.
Yes. Okay, so that was the point I was trying to get in there, that your own school experience was at an all-male Catholic college preparatory school in St. Louis, and then you're currently teaching at a similar one, but not the same one.
Correct.
Yes. Okay, so then I was also interested that you threw in the Bible Belt phrase when you're studying biology at Missouri State, of course, a state university, so quite a public institution. Did anything interesting or curious about your studying of biology in that part of the country, that kind of culture? Obviously, it was a state university, but you're in Springfield, Missouri, and the surrounding area. Did you find anything feeling like it was a clash of cultures, perhaps?
Oh, my gosh, absolutely. First of all, just being from Chaminade in St. Louis, it was almost like I was in a Catholic bubble. I remember my biology instructors talking about like the intelligent design debate and creationism, whether it should be taught in biology classes. And my science instructor showed a really good documentary series. It's called the Pbs Evolution Series, and I actually use it now as a teacher myself in the classroom. Yeah, sure. And it's a 7-part series. I use Part 1 and Part 7 mostly. Part 1 is called Darwin's Dangerous Idea. It walks you through how he came up with his idea of evolution and how there was a lot of controversy when he first published about it. And Part 7 is called What About God? And it talks about how evolution is talked about today in American culture and sort of the conflict there.
Oh, but that's great. So you saw that, you viewed that at Chaminade when you were in school, is that what you said?
Yeah, I viewed it as a student, and I still use that same documentary series today at Priory as a teacher.
Okay, so having been... Go ahead.
It's a really good series, and so that got me thinking about, the whole issue of, religion and science. And I remember this one time in my English class at Chaminade where we were given the opportunity to write an essay about any topic we wanted, and I chose my essay on why evolution should be taught in all schools. And I remember my English teacher saying to me, well, that's not really an essay, that's not really an argument, because doesn't everyone just agree with that? And it really illustrated to me just how not only was I kind of in this bubble, but so were some of my Catholic educators as well. And then when I went down to Missouri State, one of the first things I encountered going to the science building for my biology classes were there were street preachers. There were these guys who just were on the, corners of the sidewalk, preaching. And they were saying things like, if you learn evolution, you'll burn in hell, real fire and brimstone kind of preaching, pointing their fingers at all the students and telling how they're doomed to hell if they accept evolution or Big Bang.
Or campus.
They're really doing this hardcore kind of, preaching at everyone. And it was quite the different experience from where just, everyone, at my Catholic school just kind of accepted it, no big problem. But then realizing the world is much bigger than, a Catholic school or a Catholic city like St. Louis.
Yeah. But the presumption, of course, being that we, as in Catholic education, would have been more in line in this case with the larger scientific community or maybe even the broader culture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
You enter into, the culture of, say, some of Springfield, and I wouldn't say the entire place is like that, but you get these Bible Belt preachers there on campus.
Right.
That was an exposure to something that was certainly unexpected, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as just like a student in the dorm room, like I didn't have any of my friends from high school join me at Missouri State.
Sure.
So I just got that fun random roommate assignment where you don't really know who you're going to be paired up with. And so my second year, I was paired up with a student who, just like me, was a biology major, right?
Yeah.
The only difference is he was Southern Baptist. He believed in God, but he was a young earth creationist. He believed that the earth was less than 10,000 years old. He didn't believe in evolution. He was a great guy. We were friends for that whole year. We were rooming together, but as far as our ideas of how science works and even how religion works, even though we were both theists, we were very much on two different wavelengths. And then as fate would have it, my third year, right after I was roommates with that guy, I got a new roommate. He was atheist. He was an art major, and he accepted all the things in science. Like I would talk to him about what I'm learning in school about evolution, and he would be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And, he had no problems with the science. So even though we disagreed on the whole is there a God question, we actually agreed where the science was.
That's pretty fascinating, yeah. Which one did you find easier to, I don't know if get along with is the right word, but...
Oh, they were both friends. We got along really well, and even a couple of times the three of us all got together like in the cafeteria to have lunch and talk. Okay. And so it was great. I was friends with both of those guys, but it was just such a fascinating experience, like talking with the one and then rooming with the other one and having conversations on a completely different level.
Yeah, I guess what I meant was who was the easier to intellectually get along with, in the sense that the back and forth seemed a little more the same fit, I suppose. Even though you might have disagreed on, whether it was the science or the religion, depending on which roommate. Where did you find yourself being more comfortable in terms of their worldview?
I would have to say with the atheist roommate, because whenever we disagreed on something, at least he would accept evidence-based reasoning. Like, he would at least hear me out if I was able to produce some modicum of evidence for my case. Whereas my Southern Baptist roommate, like, I would present to him both like scientific as well as like theological evidence. Like, he had very different religious beliefs as well in terms of the Bible, and even when I would try to propose to him, evidence of like, look, this isn't my opinion, this is fact, he would often go into this denialist thing where he'd just be like, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree. And it's like, no, these are facts, buddy. These are things we know to be true. So I would say the whole, I guess being on the same page was a little bit more with my atheist roommate. But again, they were both great guys, and we both got along really well.
Sure. Okay. Great. And then you said you came back to St. Louis, the St. Louis area, and studied at Maryville University. My knowledge of Maryville is that it started out Catholic, right? Do you know much about their history? Okay, so this was a Catholic university, much like Webster used to be, and then at some point probably sold to either, is it still private?
It is still private, and it's mostly a lay Catholic university. I don't know the exact details behind it, but you're right. It doesn't have as much of like, a Catholic standing as, say, St. Louis University, which is a Jesuit university.
Oh, okay. So, but there is still some Catholic identification there.
There is some, yes. It's just not run by any kind of clergy group. It's not run by like Jesuits or Benedictines or anything like that.
Okay, I didn't realize that. But you got your education degree there.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. Well, let's move then into your current teaching. Clearly, it sounds like biology is your area of interest. At least you've sustained that since your high school days. So you're teaching what grade levels?
So I do teach 9th grade biology at Priory, but I also teach 8th grade physical science, which is like an introduction for our 8th graders into physics and chemistry. But my favorite course, if I had to pick a favorite one, is my 7th grade science course that I teach here. It's called the Discover Nature program. It's a curriculum generated by the Missouri Department of Conservation. And how it works on the surface is introducing 7th graders to biology and life science through Missouri ecology. But it actually really does more than that. It really makes the kids feel like they have a personal responsibility to Missouri natural resources, because we use examples and we talk about animals and plants that are native to their own backyards, to public parks, to things on campus. We have a pond on campus that we'll go down to, and we'll go do water monitoring. We'll do water chemistry tests on it. We have woods just behind our school building, and so we'll do like some forest surveys. And so all of this is geared towards the goal of getting students to feel like they should be practicing sustainability even when they get back home, whether it's decreasing their carbon footprint or, practicing better water quality management skills at home, but just feeling a little bit more personally responsible as being a good steward to the environment. And that's why I really like the program a whole lot, because we do a lot of outdoor discovery, a lot of outdoor inquiry into what's actually going on in our ponds, what's really going on in the forest. We even take the kids out to bush wildlife for fishing, macroinvertebrate collecting, and water chemistry analysis. And it's just a great day of just the kids discovering what's going on in these ecosystems, how things are playing out, both on like the chemical level as well as like the organism level. So it's really a lot of fun.
So the Missouri Conservation Society, is that what it's called?
Missouri Department of Conservation, MDC.
Missouri Department of Conservation. Okay, so they've written the program.
They have a program called Discover Nature, and it's for K through 12, actually pre-K through 12, and we use their 2 units called Nature Unhooked and Nature Unbound.
Do you find anything in it that would be objectionable from, the Catholic worldview, or, I guess objectionable, it maybe is a strong word here, but is there anything perhaps obviously missing in the curriculum that you feel you might have to enhance it with? That's probably the better way of asking it.
The only thing that I try to add to it that I find is missing is I introduce a very first unit, once the 7th grade year starts, of basically the what is science, as opposed to what they think science is. Because a lot of times you get 7th graders coming in the classroom where they think they know what science is, but unfortunately they don't. Like a lot of 7th graders think that science is just memorizing facts. And so one of the things that I try to teach them is science is a verb, it's not a noun. Science is something you do to discover the natural world. And so I kind of make up my own unit for that. But other than that, I think it's a really excellent program for any school, be they public or private in the Missouri area.
Yeah. Well, that's been a theme running through this series. There's certainly been a misunderstanding, or at least a cloudy thinking about what science really is, or what science is capable of, what science is intended to do, those kinds of things. And I can think of a couple other, science teachers in the series mentioning the philosophy of science being noticeably missing from a lot of this curriculum in regards to, truly understanding even, certainly the limitations of science, but also what it, is it truly meant to do. And you've mentioned the verb part of it, to be discovery and to test things and to reveal the natural world. But can you take it beyond the natural world? And do you ever attempt to draw on some of the other Catholic sources in your classroom? Would that be taking it too far? Would you be uncomfortable with that?
So one of the things that I try to impart on my students just right off the bat is that the sciences and the arts do not conflict with one another. And I use the word sciences and arts in their plural form because a lot of students think, well, science is just science class. And I'm like, well, no, math is a science and history is a science, as well as the arts doesn't just include, painting, but it also includes music, it includes drama class, and it includes religion class as well. And I explain to them how they are separate academic disciplines, but you need both of them to really have a holistic education. And so it's not a big surprise that even if you look at a modern-day scientist, they might be a talented musician or a painter or have very deep spiritual beliefs. One of my favorite scientists is a guy by the name of Ken Miller, who was very important in terms of settling the Dover versus Kitzmiller case of whether or not intelligent design should be taught in the classroom. He came out against intelligent design as an evolutionary biologist, but he's also a practicing Catholic. And so,
I know who you're talking about now that you mentioned that. I didn't recognize the name.
Yeah, he was one of the authors of what's often called the Dragonfly textbook, the textbook that was used in that court case. And so,
gotcha, right.
Yeah, he's a very great example of how you can have both a person be a scientist, an evolutionary biologist, and still maintain a Catholic faith life. He didn't have to reject his Catholicism to practice science.
Right. Do you remember the argument to a point, and you said you wrote a paper on this, I think, on why intelligent design, falls short? Like, how would you articulate that? Certainly, would you feel comfortable even sharing that with your students?
Oh yeah. In fact, I go out of my way to do it. There's a great there's a great resource it's free on YouTube. You just type into a YouTube search bar, Judgment Day Intelligent Design on Trial, and it's about 2 hours long. It's a little lengthy, but there are a lot of great parts in it where they reenact that Dover versus Kitzmiller case, kind of showing why intelligent design kind of falls flat on its face. And yet, at the same time, the idea of evolution, whether you're teaching evolution in a public school or even in a private Catholic school, doesn't dismiss the idea of God. It doesn't mean that you have to reject your faith in God to accept the science. And so I very much recommend that to any science teachers who might be listening.
Sure. How about, so episode 7 of the PBS series you said you used enters into the question of God.
Correct.
So where does that thing land?
So one of the interesting things about that is they actually show Liberty University, which is a private university. It was founded by Jerry Falwell.
Yeah,
and how,
Reverend Jerry Falwell.
Right, and how some of the students there have trouble understanding science when they also have these other religious beliefs. It kind of goes outside the Catholic framework, and it is a little bit dated because it actually occurred before the Dover versus Kitzmiller case. But I think it's still good at addressing some of the questions that often pop up in the classroom. Like a common one that I get all the time is the logical fallacy of God of the gaps, that if we don't know something in science, well, then just insert God. That's kind of a silly thing to do. That's actually an argument from ignorance. Like, for a long time, creationists used to say, well, you haven't found the missing link, so therefore God must have snapped his fingers and poof, appeared a human being. And even when we started to find the missing links, they then tweaked their argument. Well, you can't explain how the human eye evolved. Well, you can't explain how a bacteria flagella evolved. And so they would come up with these arguments that were essentially just the same thing over and over again, argument from ignorance. If I don't know something, then God. And so this particular series kind of addresses that question there and really shows how that's an argument from ignorance. That's not really a logical place to argue for the existence of God, saying, well, we don't know.
Well, it seems to me the flip side of that is something perhaps your art student roommate would have said about, accepting any of the scientific arguments. But when we don't have an answer, it's just a matter of time, right? Anything and everything that is true and real can be and will eventually be discovered. We just haven't found it yet.
Right.
So in other words, it sort of rules out the possibility that anything can be supernatural or have this metaphysical realm to it. How would you address that, or do you address it?
So what I tell my 7th graders is that on one hand, you have the sciences, which address the natural world, things that we can test, things that we can objectively verify, and that the arts is for not just the supernatural world, but for things that are not objectively verifiable, things that are subjective. And a great example that you can use with kids is like, okay, as a scientist, as an objective, rational, reasonable thinker, which is the better video game, Fortnite or Mario Kart? Well, that depends on your opinion. There is no one objective answer. To me, I think Mario Kart is a really great game, but I got students who will probably crucify me for this interview because they all believe that Fortnite is the best video game ever. So hopefully they don't hear this interview.
Right. Well, sure, they might make the case, and and you can argue. That's a lot of the fun of arguing opinions, ultimately, when they are. You make a case for why you value something more than another thing. But I suppose in the larger realm of the Catholic school, and I don't know how well you know your colleagues in other departments, do you know how they're approaching or teaching the arts? Insofar as, say, certainly, I don't know if philosophy is really being taught, at least not explicitly in a course. But, there's been a case made for many, many centuries that there is a definable quality that is beyond opinion, right? So it may be I prefer this over that, and there's my opinion. But then to make a judgment, say, between, Beethoven and Katy Perry, there's an objective difference in the quality of that music. No, not meant to denigrate Katy Perry necessarily, but I could put forth an argument that Beethoven is qualitatively better, and that's more or less a fact.
I would argue that that is your opinion. Even if you discern what you qualify as being better, I'm not a music buff by any means, but
Okay.
Even if you were to argue this point and this point and this point that Beethoven has, that Katy Perry's music does not have, that makes it better. It is a fact that Beethoven has those 3 points. It is a fact that Katy Perry's music lacks those 3 points. But
Right.
your choice to qualify them as being, quote, better or superior, that would be your opinion. So it's still a subjective argument. It's still a subjective thesis. And that's the key difference there between the arts and the sciences. It doesn't matter what your opinion is in science. The earth is round, not flat. The moon is made out of rock. It's not made out of cheese. You may want it to be made out of cheese, but the fact is that it is made out of rock. And that's the
Right.
difference between scientific theory and subjective beliefs. I don't believe in evolution. I accept evolution. I believe in God. I might be wrong, but I believe in it because I choose to believe in it. It fulfills me on a personal level, but it is not something I can state as a scientific theory because it is beyond the natural world which science deals with. And that's why you've probably heard the statement that science can neither confirm nor deny the existence of God. And so it's pretty much up to you whether or not you want to believe in God or not.
Right. I guess you'd still run into the danger, though, especially if you categorize theology as simply an art or one of the arts, then we all have just opinions about which religion is true and which is not.
I would say,
go ahead.
Obviously
it's not within the realm of science, so we're safe saying this is not the natural world, and we're never going to be able to prove it as such. But there are other ways to show evidence of the truth of a claim about the world and the universe, perhaps. And that is not just relative opinion.
I would say that if you're talking about the natural world, then yes, that is certainly true. But if you're talking about the supernatural world, something that you believe to be true, this is something that comes from within you. And you can share that with other people, certainly, and that's what happens, I think, in the theology classroom, in the religion class, is that you share your faith and you talk about what it is to be a Catholic, but ultimately it comes from within that person. I cannot show you conclusive evidence of the existence of a God in the same way I can show you conclusive evidence that evolution does exist and has existed. So these two things are not the same. And I'm often worried when people try to use the words like evidence and proof for both, because I think what you're going to get is a lot of confused students. If a theology teacher says we have proof in God, and even if they specify it as spiritual proof or personal proof, well, then that kid is going to go on to science class, and the teacher's going to say we have proof that evolution is real, and they're going to walk from that science class thinking that evolution is just a belief. Just like some people believe in God and some people don't, there are some people who believe in evolution and some people who don't. And it's just kind of up to your own opinion. And that's a problem for me as a science teacher, because I want students to accept what we know to be true in the natural world, that it's not a matter of just your opinion or your belief, it's a matter of what actually exists in reality.
Right. Yeah, insofar as what we can prove through evidence. I understand what you mean by the confusion that might be born of that, but on my side of things, teaching theology, I would certainly want to make clear to the students, I mean, that's part of teaching them, what is meant by that and how those things are different from the two different ways of knowing the truth. Because I make truth claims all the time as far as Catholic teaching is concerned. And and the word evidence is it's in the textbook, right? There is evidence, not of a scientific nature, it's supra science, supra scientific, I guess is what I mean to say, of the resurrection. You can't apply normal, even let's say historical, not science. But historical.
Well, history is part of the sciences, so no, it would be scientific. But go on.
Okay, and that so of a certain type of science, then, in applying historical standards, you can make an argument that there is some historical evidence that the resurrection did happen or did occur. But you'll never be able to ultimately prove it, but you can provide evidence. Would you be uncomfortable with that kind of language?
I would disagree with that, because I'm going to use an analogy to help you out, because I've often heard when it comes to the gay marriage debate that a lot of people say that, well, we shouldn't say gay marriage is, quote, marriage, because by broadening that word marriage, we're somehow cheapening it. We're making it less meaningful than it was when it only applied to one man and one woman. In the same way, I feel like if you're going to use evidence for things that are not objectively verifiable, you are cheapening the word evidence. You're almost making it a meaningless word, because when scientists use the word evidence, they're not talking about a strong feeling or a belief or something that you feel in the depths of your soul. It's something that any third party could see, could observe, and see that it is in fact true. But if you're talking about Jesus' resurrection, that might be true for you, it might be true for your students, it might be true for a majority of the world's population, but it's not going to be true for someone who has been raised in a different religion or someone who has no religion, like an atheist. They won't look at your quote-unquote evidence, and they will reject it out flatly.
Well, we're still talking about evidence in the sense that this is something that any objective observer would view the same or similarly. So, for example, were people willing to go to their death on the basis of their experience of the risen Jesus? So is this significant evidence? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, and then judgments can be made. But nonetheless, the historian would look at that and say, curious that martyrdom was common amongst those people closest to Jesus. Instead of recanting or renouncing or denying the resurrection, they were willing to die for their understanding and belief that they experienced the risen Jesus.
But their willingness to die doesn't prove that Jesus rose from the dead.
Doesn't
prove. That just proves that they believed it.
Exactly. True. Yes.
Okay. So, and I think
which is still nonetheless a piece of evidence is all I was, and any objective observer could agree to that point is all. Doesn't prove the resurrection. Like I said, I don't think it can be proven historically speaking, but it can be supported through evidence. I guess where I'm going with this ultimately is something that you and I shared with Father Spitzer, who is the former president of Gonzaga University, and Father Robert Spitzer, the Jesuit, came to St. Louis a few years ago. And I think I saw something in our earlier exchange that you had seen him speak.
Yes, in fact, I went. It was I don't know exactly what it was called. It was like a conference that he held here in St. Louis for Catholic educators. And I attended, and even he was nice enough to let me join a small panel of educators up on stage to discuss these kind of issues. So, I have met with Father Spitzer and had a little personal rapport with him on that day.
Yeah. What did you think of that, or what are your impressions, and what do you remember about it? And,
well, similar to where our conversation is kind of going, I think we both recognized that there is a problem in, Catholic education with students believing this misconception that you either have to accept science or religion, and you can't have both. We were both on the same page as being that's a problem, and that's a very real misconception that we should address as Catholic educators. But I think his perspective was to more vilify atheists and secular science as being the cause of this misconception. And I think that's a very gross misunderstanding of the issue. And from my own personal experiences, I can say that I think the ones that are really causing this problem are the ones who are in denial of science because they feel it goes against their religious beliefs. Like my, Southern Baptist roommate who didn't want to believe in evolution because he had been raised to believe that the earth is less than 10,000 years old. And if you just do a YouTube search for something like Fox News and evolution, you'll get all kinds of videos of, conservatives in the media saying, well, evolution isn't true and evolution is anti-religion and it's atheist. And unfortunately, as a teacher in the West County, St. Louis area, this is what I face most often in the classroom. I have to first convince my students that science is not anti-religion and that you can have both. You can have both an understanding of science and accept your religious beliefs. But to say that science somehow proves religion or it proves your religious beliefs, well, then you've gone a step too far. Then you're saying that science can do something that it cannot do because it is limited to the natural world.
What I recall from much of the lecture that he gave that first night, I'm talking again about Father Spitzer, it had to do with the post-Big Bang sort of moment. Well, it was really Father George Lemaitre, the discoverer, if you will, of the Big Bang theory using Einstein's theory that Einstein initially balked at, but later apologized to Father Lemaitre for being wrong. He was wrong, well, Einstein was, and Lemaitre was right, that the universe is expanding, and it's expanding at a rapid rate or an increasing rate, which was suggestive that of evidence of a creator is what I remember the conclusion being, right? So if there's an initiator, there must be an initiator to the Big Bang in order to set the universe in motion in such a way that the universe would continue to expand.
And
do you remember that?
I remember that argument. In fact, I have sitting on my shelf right here "From Nothing to Cosmos" by Father Spitzer.
I use that myself. Are you comfortable with that presentation? Do you ever use that with your students?
I would agree with it in that it is a great way for students to both have their beliefs as well as accepting the science behind the Big Bang. So if you choose to believe that God was sort of the spark maker, if you will, God made the spark that set the Big Bang in motion, which then created the laws of physics, which then created the universe and the galaxies, etc., etc., to me, that's a wonderful marriage of science and religion together within a student's understanding of academia. That, I think, is great. Where I disagree is claiming that, the idea that we have this Big Bang theory is somehow proof of God, proof of a creator God. That's where I think he crosses the line, Father Spitzer crosses the line, because it's essentially the same thing that the creationists try to say. It's an argument out of ignorance. We don't know what the precursor was to the Big Bang. We can't possibly understand what it was like before the Big Bang, if I can even use that word, before the Big Bang, because it was the beginning of time as well as the laws of physics.
Well, I think that is the argument, right, that there was a beginning point. So if there is a beginning, and I remember Father Spitzer even drawing off of that line from Genesis, right, in the beginning, which is revelation, but nonetheless seems to confirm, again, seems to provide evidence that there was a beginning, as the science would now support through Father Lemaitre's discovery of a beginning point. In other words, if the world is expanding and increasing in its expansion, then there must have been a starting point. And if there was a starting point, it means what comes from nothing? Nothing comes from nothing, right? So if there was nothing before the Big Bang, how could have it possibly happened? So in other words, it is you're tending toward a philosophical argument, but it's using science to achieve it.
Well, again, I would disagree.
Still too far?
I would still disagree, because what you're saying is whatever created that starting point must have been God. Well, no, we don't know what created that starting point. We don't know what the starter was. It could have been something that exists outside of normal space-time, as our limited perceptions can understand it.
Okay,
so,
that's fair.
Yeah, and so if you want to believe that that's God, great, and Lord knows, it's a great way of, presenting it to students in a Catholic school setting. I just think you're doing a disservice by trying to say to students that is somehow proof of God.
Yeah, I think, again, Father Spitzer's language was more a creator. So if he used the term God...
Even saying it's a creator, you are just assuming this thing that you don't know is something that you wish to classify, whether you call it a God or a creator. That is still using a logical fallacy known as the argument from ignorance.
You're more comfortable saying this is unknown science.
The most honest answer we could give is that we don't know. Yeah. We don't know what was prior to the Big Bang. Maybe one day our ability to understand what that was like will get there, but we haven't yet.
All right, yeah. Great, thank you for explaining that. I appreciate your point of view. Mm-hmm. I maybe one more question along the lines of your teaching culture there at Priory, which is all boys, and you teach 7th grade, 9th grade?
7th, 8th, and 9th grade.
7th, 8th, and 9th, okay. Do you find a difference or distinction in how it's received? So in terms of the development in the age there, their understanding of science, to be sure, but their comprehension and ability to take on these large questions and big picture items, is there how well is it received, I guess, at each level? Would you find a difference there, or how would you describe that?
Well, they are certainly surprised at first, no doubt about it. They are kind of shell-shocked at first, that first week of school, learning what science is. And again, that's coming out of kind of a grade school understanding of what science is, of just kind of memorizing facts. But then when you have them walk through levels of certainty from, heaven exists to the earth is round, up until this point in grade school, they just kind of assumed whatever their teacher said was just on the same level of certainty. But now they have to understand that there are different levels of certainty. We have empirical proof that the earth is round, but I do not have any kind of empirical proof that heaven exists. And so when I walk them through how you can think critically, how logic and evidence-based reasoning is what allows scientists to understand the natural world and how we can discern it from the supernatural world, then it starts to click in students' minds how they can look at things a little bit differently, how they can look at science differently from the arts, but still see it as a complement to the arts. Again, it's not disproving the arts. They work together side by side. And every now and then I'll get students who will regress, like especially if I have the same student like 3 years in a row as they go from 7th grade to 9th grade. But usually whenever they have these periods of, uncertainty and, they ask questions in class, I use it as a great example to talk about those things, to kind of dive into their inquiries about where they feel science and religion may be in conflict.
Do you find that the regression tends more toward they slip back into the grade school mentality, or do you find that it's more of the science must be hostile towards religion mentality?
I feel like they regress into an area where they're trying to pair up with what they're hearing in school versus what they're hearing in media, whether it's social media or, YouTube or cable news or whatever.
Sure.
They're trying to find, a common ground. And I'll give you 2 examples real quick. I had one student who had heard from somewhere on YouTube about near-death experiences as being proof that, Christianity is true, because he had heard that these people had near-death experiences and that they saw Jesus or they had seen heaven in their near-death experiences. Right. And this was right during our evolution unit, and so he asked me about it, and I just kind of said to him, well, if a Muslim person has a near-death experience and they see images that are consistent with Islam, or if a Buddhist person has a near-death experience and they have experiences that are consistent with, the Buddhist religion, well, does that mean that they are correct? And he kind of gave me a little wry smirk, and very sarcastically he said, no, they're all wrong. Only the ones that I choose to believe are correct. And so I got a big chuckle out of that, and the rest of the class laughed. And even he kind of realized where that kind of fell on its head. And so I appreciate questions like that from the students, because it's not them trying to be obstinate. They're just trying to make sense of what they hear from, all sources of different things on the internet and from beyond to what they're learning about in school. And another example, my favorite one, is a student asking me during the evolution unit 9th grade year, well, couldn't the devil have put those fossils there? And I laughed and I said, well, let me ask you something. Do you believe that the earth is round? And he said, yes. And I'm like, okay, well, why do you believe the earth is round? Can you give me one piece of evidence showing that the earth is round and not flat? And he said, well, we have satellites that take pictures of the earth, and we can see in those pictures that it's round. And so I asked him, well, how do you know that the devil's not screwing with our satellites? How do you know he's not testing our faith by giving us false satellite images? And so he kind of laughed and he said, okay, I get what you're saying. And so, yeah, that's...
Now, there are people who might think that. There are people who might believe that.
Oh, I know that there are. Again, from southern Missouri, yes, I understand that there are people like that. But I don't simply tune out those students. I don't simply ignore them. I entertain their questions, and I have them think about it in a logical way so that they can kind of come to the conclusion that, oh, wait, the science is still legit, but it's not like, disproving religious beliefs.
Right.
It's
I guess I was thinking more the tendency or the trend or the more common. I mean, the numbers would bear out, especially in West County of St. Louis, and the level of academics that are that you're teaching at Priory, which I know to be a high level high school. You would find that the science is hostile to religion mentality. Just social media, YouTube, wherever it is they might be drawing from it, would probably be equally as common, if not more so.
One of the interesting things I've observed just in Priory, again, a West County school, I don't know if this is true of where you teach or if other teachers have had this experience, it's not so much the religion versus science thing, it's the politics versus science. Because a lot of students have very passionate political ideologies, and if a politician is saying that global climate change isn't true, or if, evolution isn't true, I find that actually weighs on the student a lot more than their religious beliefs, because the Catholic Church, most of the students at Priory are Catholic, so if nothing else, just, educating them that the Catholic Church is okay with evolution, it's okay with the Big Bang Theory, that kind of nips that in the bud. But just really trying to explain to them that, not all politicians are right about everything. It doesn't mean that your personal political party or your favorite politician is a bad person, that they're wrong on everything. It just means that they might be wrong on this one point regarding climate change or regarding evolution.
Right. Okay. All right, fair enough. Thank you very much. Let me ask you one final question. This is sort of an open-ended, just anything at the end here to wrap up that you'd like to share with us, a final thought, a final word, any insight that we may have missed so far?
At the risk of being confrontational, I just want to say one thing. As someone who has had friends at Missouri State and had a lot of personal experiences with both sides of the equation, I had friends who were atheists on one hand, I had friends who were creationists on the other hand. I kind of find myself here in the middle, where I don't exactly agree with either side on everything. But I will say this about Catholic education. I don't think it's a good idea for Catholic educators to take the approach of what I like to call the Doubting Thomas approach. You remember Doubting Thomas, of course, from the Bible. People people had heard that Jesus had risen, and as soon as they heard about it, they believed. But not Thomas. He had doubts. And even when Jesus appeared before him, he was still doubting whether or not it was a ghost or a hallucination. And so Jesus said, "Fine, Thomas, feel my side, feel my hands, see that I am flesh and blood and not just a ghost." I kind of feel like there's this movement within Catholic education that we almost need science to verify and validate our religious beliefs. And I think that's bad. I think that's almost making the argument that we should all be a bunch of doubting Thomases looking for that empirical evidence instead of just believing on faith that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that heaven and hell are places we could go after we die. All the things that make us Catholic are something we believe on faith, not by fact. I mean, how do we start the Nicene Creed? Do we start it with, I have facts in one God? I have scientific evidence of one God? No, we start it with, I believe in one God. And I think that's a powerful statement that we make as Catholics. We could be wrong. We don't really know what happens after we die, but we choose to believe that there is a God, that he gave us his only Son who died on the cross for our sins, and that we too can go to heaven and be one with him. I think that's a powerful statement of faith when you don't have the facts to back it up. We don't rely on those facts. We are relying exclusively on faith.
No, excellent. I don't know if it makes you feel any better, the way I teach that story in the resurrection account in John's Gospel of, Thomas had an advantage that the rest of us don't have. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just to verify; it was to verify to him. See my wounds, touch the nail marks and the piercing of my side. It truly is me, Thomas. But blessed are those who have believed without having seen.
Correct.
So it seems to me that the case that John the Evangelist is making there is that faith is, in many ways, a superior value here. To believe on faith is going to be greater for the future of this movement. To be a disciple of Jesus. It is going to be ultimately much more necessary than providing proof.
Yes.
So I thought that was a good point for you to end with, and I appreciate your time. This has been excellent. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for providing me with this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad you could join us today. You've been listening to Patrick Panozzo. I am the host of the WCAT radio show, Faith and Science in Catholic Schools. You've been listening to an interview with William Bander. Once again, thank you for your time today, William, and good luck to you.
All right, and to you, Patrick. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you, and good day. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.